Have you ever wondered how your life would look if you were born into another family?
I still remember walking into my parents' house that Easter, trying to keep things normal even though I had been dreading the holiday for weeks. My stomach was tight the whole way there because I knew Ryan, my younger brother, would be in top form, ready to remind everyone of how successful he thought he was and how little he respected me, and I didn't even want to think about what he would say this year. As soon as I walked in, I forced a smile and tried to keep my head down, greeting family members, exchanging polite hugs, and pretending that nothing mattered more than pretending to be happy. My mom was bustling around in the kitchen, half yelling instructions to my dad, who was trying to look useful but mostly just got in the way. Nana June was in her usual chair, observing everything with a sharp, knowing look that could cut through steel if she wanted to. I took a deep breath, hoping this year would be tolerable, and then I heard him. Ryan leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered across his face, and without any warning, he said, "So, Emma, are you still not doing anything real in tech? Or are you just collecting imaginary credentials now?" The room went silent for a second because he had a habit of doing that, just dropping little jabs to see how people reacted, and I froze because it wasn't just a joke. It was pointed, public, and entirely meant to humiliate me in front of everyone. I wanted to respond, to snap back, to remind him that I had built something meaningful, but something stopped me. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was restraint, or maybe I just didn't want to feed into his satisfaction. Instead, I just smiled faintly and said nothing, sitting there as the silence stretched. My mom shot me a glance that I knew meant, "Don't start anything," and I nodded, forcing myself to stay calm. I could feel Ryan's grin widen as he realized he had gotten the reaction he wanted, but then something unexpected happened. Nana June tilted her head ever so slightly, her eyes narrowing as she looked directly at him, and asked, "Is that why your company just got bought?" The words landed like a hammer. There was no drama in her voice, no emphasis, just the matter-of-fact tone she always used when she wanted to make people think, and the silence that followed was immediate and heavy. Everyone at the table, even Ryan, looked confused, unsure of what she meant. I could feel my chest tighten because I hadn't expected her to speak up like that, and I noticed the subtle shift in energy around the table. My parents exchanged a quick glance that said more than words ever could. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, probably to mock her or maybe to double down on his ego, but no words came out. He looked completely thrown off balance, like he had just realized he might have overstepped for the first time in his life. I kept my head straight, pretending not to notice how shaken he was, but inside, I felt this strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. It was one of those moments where you know the power dynamic has shifted just slightly, and that tiny crack can grow into something much bigger if handled carefully. The rest of dinner passed in a strange haze. Ryan tried to speak a few times, throwing out forced laughter or casual mentions of his work, but each attempt landed flat, and the family barely responded, still processing what Nana June had said. I ate slowly, keeping my thoughts to myself, letting the tension simmer without doing anything to fan the flames. I could sense that something was building, something that hadn't existed at any previous family gathering. I didn't need to say a word because the seed of curiosity and unease had been planted, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before it started to grow. When dinner was finally winding down, my parents excused themselves to clear the table, leaving me at the end of the long dining table across from Ryan, who was visibly uncomfortable. He kept glancing at me, probably trying to gauge whether I was about to explode with a sarcastic comment or an insult, but I just smiled faintly, completely composed. There was a quiet confidence in that smile, a patience that Ryan had never seen from me before, and I knew it unnerved him more than anything I could have said. Nana June gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, like she understood what I was capable of, and that tiny gesture felt like an unspoken alliance. By the time the coffee and dessert came around, the tension had shifted. Ryan was still trying to find some foothold to regain control of the conversation, but every word he spoke felt empty. The family had already started talking about other things, but I could sense the cracks forming in his ego. I didn't say anything about my work, I didn't brag or boast, and yet, in that silence, I had won the first round without even lifting a finger. As the night ended and people started to leave, Ryan lingered for a moment, muttering something about he would see me soon and things weren't over, but there was no bite in it. I watched him leave, feeling a quiet satisfaction, and realized that this Easter dinner, which had begun with humiliation, had ended with something I had never expected. The silence, the unspoken acknowledgement, and the shift in energy had given me a glimpse of the path forward. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't dramatic, but the first move had been made, and I knew exactly how to play the next ones. On the drive home, I kept replaying Nana June's question in my head because even though she had said it like a casual observation, the timing and the calm way she dropped it into the silence made it land harder than any speech I could have delivered. And I realized I did not need to defend myself with quick comebacks or a tidy elevator pitch when the truth was already sitting there, waiting for me to stop protecting everyone from it. I had spent months keeping my mouth shut, not because I was uncertain or ashamed, but because the rules around my job are strict and the stakes are high and there is real weight to signing your name under a line that can change salaries, titles, and houses in a single stroke. So I learned to carry information quietly and to let patience do what yelling never can. The simplest version is that my company had been circling a handful of acquisitions, nothing flashy, just smart strategic moves, and one of those names had floated up again and again because the product had promise, the revenue curve looked hopeful if shepherded correctly, and the founder kept burning relationships the way arrogant founders do when they confuse charisma with governance. And I did not put the name together with my family until the day I opened a due diligence deck and saw the logo I had seen on Ryan's hoodies for the past couple of years. I wish I could tell you I slammed my laptop shut or ran straight to legal to declare a conflict. But what actually happened is that I sat very still for a long minute, and then I emailed our counsel and our head of corporate development and wrote that I had a potential personal conflict and would follow whatever process they deemed appropriate. And after a week of review and an arm's-length protocol that kept me clear of decisions I should not touch, the team came back and told me that my role could focus on integration planning and employee retention because the target's board had already opened the door on the sale. The investors were impatient, and the only non-negotiable was that I would not communicate with the founder directly. That last part felt like a relief at the time because I had no interest in mixing family with governance, and I thought the cleanest path would also be the kindest path, where no one had to know who was doing what and everyone could retreat with their dignity intact. Of course, that fantasy ended the second Ryan performed for the family at Easter, because the second-hand humiliation stirred up every year had finally bumped into consequences, and while I hate admitting it, the sting helped me let go of the instinct to keep protecting his feelings when he never once protected mine. I got home, put my phone face down, and opened the latest internal memo that outlined two options on the table, one that would keep Ryan in a figurehead role with training wheels and limited authority, and another that would shift control to an interim operator with a retention plan that saved the jobs of the people who were actually making the product work while offering the founder a clean exit with conditions. I read the language 3 times, took notes the way I always do, and felt this cold, steady clarity settle in, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I wanted to do right by the people under him who had been promised raises that never arrived and had been asked to accept late payroll with a smile. I called Sylvia, the partner at the fund that led his last round, a woman who once brushed me off at a conference panel and later apologized when she realized I was the one who had fixed a nightmare integration. And I told her that if they wanted the employees protected and the product given a real chance, the cleanest path was the second option with the interim operator and the board vote scheduled as soon as their counsel could line it up. She did not argue, which told me more than any diligence spreadsheet ever could, and she asked if the founder would be treated with baseline fairness, and I said yes. Because fairness is not the same as flattery and grown people can accept consequences without being humiliated. While we spoke, I drafted the retention matrix for the engineering leads and the support team, making sure the people who had been carrying the weight finally saw upside, and I revised the non-disparagement clause for the founder so it was firm but not petty, which was my Small promise to myself that I would not be the kind of person he had always accused me of being. When the call ended, I sent my notes to legal and asked them to circulate the revised plan to the board with a recommendation to proceed with the interim option, and then I sat back and watched the calendar populate. A neat block of time for a vote that would happen sooner than anyone outside the loop could imagine. I could have stopped there, content with the quiet machinery doing its work, but I took one more step because I felt I had earned it, and because Ryan had taken his shots in public for years. So I forwarded the employee retention outline to our integration lead with a simple instruction to schedule the all-hands at the target company immediately after the vote, with an explicit commitment that no one in the rank and file would lose salary or health coverage and that signing bonuses would hit accounts quickly, which meant the first people to hear real news would be the people who had given their evenings and weekends, not the founder who treated them like props. The invite went out while I was still staring at the quiet glow of my laptop, and a minute later my phone buzzed with an unknown number that I recognized as one of Ryan's board members, which I let roll to voicemail. And I did not feel guilty for a second, because for once I was choosing the team that deserved protection over the boy who never learned when to shut his mouth. The voicemail finished and a text from Ryan appeared asking if I had a second to talk, because he had heard something odd and wanted to clear it up fast, and I put the phone face down again, let the call notification disappear, and watched the board meeting invite lock in on my screen with a subject line that did not need any decoration, which is when I realized my patience had become a plan, my plan had become a decision, and my decision had just crossed the line into action. And whatever came next would not be theoretical anymore. The morning after Easter, I woke up with that tight coil still sitting low in my chest, because even though I had gone to sleep knowing the board calendar was locked and the retention plan was written, the family noise had not faded and my phone was stacked with messages that pretended to be casual check-ins while fishing for clues. So I made coffee, ignored everything for a while, and opened the integration worksheet again. Not because I needed to, but because the discipline of looking at clean lists steadied me and kept me from doing something impulsive that would give Ryan the fight he wanted rather than the outcome he feared. By mid-morning, I had 3 emails from Sylvia confirming that their council liked the interim operator structure and wanted to proceed on an accelerated timeline, which told me that the investors had finally chosen reality over charm and that they were ready to stop covering for missed deadlines and invented projections, and I answered with language so plain a tired board member could not misunderstand it, promising employment guarantees for the rank and file, a real budget for customer support, and a simple founder transition that would be respectful for as long as he behaved like a professional. While I wrote, my mom called and left a message that sounded like a weather report about nothing, which was her way of asking me to smooth things over without admitting that she was asking me to do it. And I stared at the transcription for a long minute, because there is a specific kind of fatigue that comes from pretending a grown man is a child who cannot handle the world he keeps bragging about conquering. I finally called Nana June instead, and she answered like she had been waiting, which is exactly what she had been doing. And when I thanked her for the question she dropped at dinner, she laughed softly and said she had not been guessing because she has cousins in every corner of every industry, and one of them had mentioned a little rumor about a founder who was about to learn the difference between owning a hoodie and owning a company, and I breathed for the first time since the table went quiet and told her I would keep things clean, and she said she knew I would because I always did, which made me want to cry and also to finish what I started. Then I called our integration lead and walked through the non-glamorous steps that actually decide whether a transition feels like a rescue or a disaster: the payroll timing, the customer communications, the admin privilege changes that have to be executed at the exact minute after the board vote, and because I know how founders behave when they sense a storm, I added a simple instruction that would look cold on paper but would save a lot of people from chaos, which was to freeze the founder's ability to send company-wide messages the moment the vote concluded and redirect all hands announcements through the interim operator, who had already drafted a clear, calm script about stability, benefits, and a product roadmap grounded in math instead of ego. Ryan texted in the afternoon with a breezy line about grabbing coffee to clear the air, which read less like peace and more like reconnaissance, and because I've learned to say yes when it serves me. I agreed to meet at a place close to the office where I could leave quickly and where he could not perform for an audience, and I walked in with a steady breath and a decision to offer him one last lane to keep a sliver of dignity if he wanted it. He started fast, talking about how everything at his company was fine except for a little investor drama and a few employees who needed firmer leadership. And then he pivoted to me and asked if I could help him with a bridge because he knew I had contacts who respected me, and I listened without interrupting, and then I told him that bridges are what you ask for when you do not want to admit the road is ending, and that if he wanted to protect his people and his own future, the smartest move would be to accept an advisory role for a limited period while a real operator stabilized the mess, and to sign the non-disparagement, he would eventually be handed with a pen that did not leak rage onto the page. He laughed the laugh he uses when he cannot process a boundary, and he said he did not take orders from people who do not have real jobs, and that he would be announcing a new partnership next week that would make everyone see him clearly. And I nodded like I was considering something, and then I told him I hoped he was right, stood up, and left without touching my drink because nothing about that conversation required another minute. Back at my desk, I opened the draft that included the optional founder emeritus language, and I removed it, not because I was angry in the hot way that makes you reckless, but because I had offered decency and received arrogance. And I know what arrogance does to a company when you let it ride on your payroll, and I will not be that foolish on anyone's behalf. I sent the revised draft to legal with a short note that documented the offer I made and the refusal I received. And then I messaged Sylvia with a timeline that moved the board vote forward by a couple of days, because momentum is a resource and I was not going to waste it on someone who believed a tagline could substitute for stewardship. Minutes later, an alert popped up on my screen showing that Ryan had scheduled an emergency all-hands for the morning before the vote, which told me he could smell the weather changing and wanted to rally the troops with another performance. So I pinged our systems team to confirm the exact moment. His admin privileges would be pulled and asked them to add a silent hold on mass emails from his account that would lift only if the board failed to pass the motion, and when they replied with a firm confirmation, I opened my calendar, moved the board session to the first hour of Monday, and hit send with a calm that felt like the final turn of a key I had been carrying for years. The weekend slid by in that strange way time moves when you are holding your breath. Because every hour looked normal from the outside while my phone hummed with messages that pretended to be family chatter, but kept circling the same question about what exactly Nana meant and whether Ryan had upset me and if I could please not let things get ugly. And I answered none of it because I had already spent years as the family shock absorber and I was finally done carrying a grown man's need to be seen as a genius while other people patched what he broke. So I buried myself in the checklists that keep my head clear, confirmed again that the payroll bridge for his employees was standing by, checked that the customer notice template was accurate and plain, and walked our systems people through the timing that would switch off his broadcast privileges the second the board vote closed, not because I wanted him embarrassed, but because chaos costs jobs and I was not going to let a tantrum ruin health insurance for people who had already taken enough hits. Early Monday, I sat in a small conference room with a legal pad I barely used and a laptop I kept on mute because everyone else on the call had more speaking parts than I did. And I listened to Sylvia lay out the case with a calm that comes from finally choosing reality, heard an independent director run through the missed targets and the burned vendor relationships that had stacked up like sandbags no one wanted to notice, and waited while counsel read the motion twice to make sure no one could pretend later that they misunderstood what was being decided. At almost the same moment, because timing is not an art so much as a discipline, Ryan tried to fire off the emergency all-hands he had scheduled over the weekend. The one he thought would rally his people around a story about a new partnership and a bright chapter if everyone just pushed a little harder, and the message bounced quietly, his admin screen grayed out. And the mass email he attempted sat in his outbox like a paper airplane shoved into a locked mailbox, which I know because our Systems lead sent me a single line that said the hold was live and clean, and I closed my eyes for a second and let that wave of relief pass without guilt because for the first time someone besides me had told him no. My phone lit with his name almost immediately, then with a number from one of his board members, then with a text from my mother asking whether I could pop by and help smooth things out because she believed in keeping families together and in giving second chances. And I stared at the screen until the flashing stopped because the habit of fixing everything dies slowly, and I needed it gone before I said something I could not take back. The vote took less time than the months of pretending it would never come. The motion passed. The interim operator stepped in with measured language that made everything feel boring on purpose, which is exactly what you want during a storm. And the integration clock started ticking with a rhythm I know better than the back of my own hand. So the prepared message went to the employees first, with clear lines about salaries continuing, benefits covered, signing bonuses for the people holding the product together, and a short invitation to an all-hands that actually existed, and within minutes the replies started to land. Quiet notes from engineers and support staff who had been bracing for the worst and could not quite believe someone had thought to put them first, and I felt that tight coil in my chest loosen because whatever anyone wanted to say about me, today I had protected people who had earned protection. Ryan kept calling, and when I finally answered it was because I did not want to wake up tomorrow wishing I had offered one last lane out of the wreck, and he started fast with a familiar spin about hostile actors and rumor mills, and how he had been about to sign something huge, and I told him as gently as I could that the board had acted, that the interim operator would reach out, that he would be treated fairly so long as he stayed professional, and that the smartest thing he could do right now was to show up to the transition meeting, look his team in the eye, and tell them the truth with enough grace to let them breathe. He went quiet for a beat, and then he laughed in that brittle way that always meant he was cornered, said he would be the one doing the talking because nobody silences a founder, and asked me point-blank whether I had anything to do with this, which I met with the only answer I could give while the paperwork dried, that I was not the person he should be speaking to, and that he should watch for a calendar invite in the next hour, and when he raised his voice I told him the call was ending and hung up, then sat there with my hands flat on the table and let the shake pass through me because doing the right thing does not always feel clean while you are doing it. The interim operators all hands started on time with a simple script about stability and a roadmap based on real numbers. The Q&A went longer than planned because people asked honest questions that deserved honest answers, and while it ran, I watched in real time as the customer support queue dropped because the message had already hit the top accounts and the tone shifted from panic to wait and see, which is often the best you can do on a first day. In the late afternoon, a courier delivered the founder transition packet to Ryan with the respectful language we had kept in place even after his coffee performance, and within minutes my phone lit again with his name and the words we both knew were coming, asking who the buyer was and whether the rumors about a certain parent company were true, and I let the call roll to voicemail because the answer had a time and a place and neither was a shouted conversation on a Monday. Then I forwarded the signed vote to legal, approved the press holding line that said nothing more than a transaction had closed, and stared at the last item on my list, the one that asked whether the founder should be included on a brief introduction call with the buyer's integration lead before the full team meeting tomorrow, and while my finger hovered over decline, I heard my door open and saw our general counsel lean in to say that a certain family member had just called the main line asking whether Emma from the acquiring company could come to dinner tonight and explain what exactly she does for a living, which made me smile in spite of myself as I clicked accept on the calendar and said I would bring dessert, because some reveals deserve an audience and this one had waited long enough. I walked into my parents' house that evening with the kind of steadiness that comes when you have already made the hard choices and the paperwork has already moved from discussion to signature, and while I knew there would be questions and defensiveness and a little theater, I also knew there would be no arguing with what had already happened, so I told myself I would keep it clean and keep it kind, because I was not there to rub anything in or to bait anyone into a scene that would live on in family lore as proof that I am difficult. My dad tried for a light joke that did not quite land. My mom hovered like she always does when she wants peace, but also wants the person who caused the mess to feel catered to. And Ryan stood near the counter pretending to scroll while sneaking looks at me like he was still deciding whether to charm me or pick a fight. And the truth is that neither approach mattered anymore because the board had voted. The interim operator had addressed his employees. And the press notice had already gone live in language so boring it might as well have been carved into a filing cabinet, which is exactly the tone you want when you are handing frightened people a new ladder out of a ditch. We sat down and plates started moving, and the conversation did that awkward shuffle families do when there is a heavy subject sitting right in the middle of the table. And I let the small talk run until Nana June tilted her head with that quick little angle that means she is done pretending not to see what is right in front of her. And she asked in the same calm voice she used on Easter whether everyone had read the short statement that said a transaction had closed and whether Ryan felt ready to talk about next steps with his team, and the air tightened because the question took away his favorite exit, which has always been to deny and delay until people get tired. He cleared his throat, tried to say something about a partnership that was still in play, and I felt that old tug to rescue the moment and make him comfortable. But I did not move an inch, because comfort is how we all got pushed into this loop in the first place. So I waited until he ran out of steam, and then I told him that the interim operator would be the one in front of the company for a while, and that the offer in his packet gave him a path to contribute as an advisor if he wanted it, with real boundaries and clear timelines, and a very specific definition of professional behavior, and that the people who built the product had signing bonuses queued and their pay would not stutter again. He looked at me like I had stolen something precious, and I suppose from his point of view I had, because he had been allowed to confuse ownership with identity for so long that the idea of structure felt like an insult. And he asked me directly whether I had done this to him on purpose, because of old grudges and family politics. And I told him that the process started before I even knew his company was on the list, and that the only part one pushed hard on was protecting his employees, and that if he wanted to be angry, he could be angry at the numbers and the broken commitments and the way investors stop listening when they see the same slide 3 quarters in a row. He said something sharp about me never understanding what it takes to start anything, and I let it pass because on another day we could make a chart of who carried what and for how long. But tonight was not for scorekeeping, tonight was for facts. So I told him that he had one real decision to make, and that it did not involve a speech, and that if he chose to keep throwing sparks, I would not be stepping in to shield him from the heat. My mom stepped in with that urgent softness she uses when she wants me to bend, asking whether there was any way to slow this down so the family could find its footing. And I said as gently as I could that the family would be okay once the truth stopped being treated like a personal attack, and that slowing down would not change the contracts already signed or the calendar invites already sent. And that what would help more than anything would be for Ryan to show up to the transition call tomorrow and tell the truth to the people who trusted him, because there is a kind of respect that blooms the second you stop spinning and start owning your choices. My dad nodded even though he did not love it, because he has always understood the difference between pride and leadership, and Nana gave me that tiny nod again, and for the first time in a long time I felt the ground tilt toward something stable. While dessert plates were landing, Ryan's phone lit with the interim operator's number, and he hesitated like a teenager caught out after curfew, and I said nothing because I was not going to narrate his next move for him. And he finally stepped into the hallway to take the call, and the room relaxed in that quiet way that happens when adults accept that the outcome has already arrived. My mother asked me what exactly I do all day, and I told her in plain words that I help teams fit together without breaking, that I argue for boring processes that keep people paid and products shipped, and that I try to make sure charm does not get confused with competence. And she breathed out like someone set a heavy bag down and said she should have asked me that question years ago. Ryan came back looking smaller in the way people look when a script has been taken away and replaced with a plan, and he started to say something defensive, and then he swallowed it and asked whether the non-disparagement clause meant he could not defend himself online, and I told him that it meant he did not get to set fire to other people's livelihoods because he was having a hard day, and that if he wanted to talk about his vision, he should do it in past tense and let the product earn its future under people who know how to run the math. I stood up to leave before anyone could turn the moment into a lecture or a plea, and I hugged my mother because none of this has been easy on her, and I hugged my dad because he respects results even when they complicate holidays. And when I bent to kiss Nana's cheek, she whispered that some victories feel quiet because they are finally safe, and I knew exactly what she meant. When I reached the door, Ryan asked whether I had enjoyed this, and I told him I had not enjoyed any of it, but that I was proud of what I protected and of how I carried it, and that if he wanted to meet in a week to talk about how to rebuild his reputation with actual work, I would show up with a notebook and a clear agenda, and that whether he took that lane was up to him. I walked out into a night that did not care about our family drama, and I felt that deep, steady relief that comes when you turn the last card in a plan that never needed a victory dance, because the point was never to crush him. The point was to take the microphone away from the noise and hand it back to the people who had earned the right to be heard, and that is exactly what happened, which is why I slept like a rock and woke up ready to go back to work. Because the story did not end with a confession or a collapse. It ended with a system that could finally hold its own weight, and with me choosing, for once, not to make myself small so someone else could pretend to be tall.